Welcome to The Jewish Lens, a podcast to discuss anything and everything from a Jewish perspective. Now, please help me welcome the man who controls the media, your host, Jonathan Rosen.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen, and today I'm thrilled to welcome an internationally recognized expert on sexuality and relationships. She's the co-director of the Modern Sexuality Training Institute. She's twice been named one of the top 50 pro-Israel influencers. She's appeared on shows such as Good Morning America, The Today Show, Rachel Ray, Oprah, and she's the author of several books, including Got Teens, The Doctor Mom's Guide to Sexuality, Social Media, and Other Adolescent Realities. Please help me welcome Dr. Logan Levkoff. Logan, thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
That was one hell of a long introduction.
I'm sorry, you didn't have to do that. You could have just said she's mouthy, and I would have been okay with that.
Well, we have a lot to cover, but I want to start with, let's go back to you. Where did you grow up? Was it New York? Did you grow up?
I grew up on Long Island. Jericho.
Okay. I like fellow New Yorkers.
Yeah. So, I mean, I grew up in New York. I grew up in a family with my younger sister and my mom and dad. And for whatever reason, there were no double standards in my home because we were both girls. And my parents were like, listen, whatever you want to do, whatever you want to be, go for it. And so for whatever reason, I'm sure they might be kicking themselves now that they raised someone as, I don't know, perhaps overly opinionated as me, overly provocative at times. I don't know.
We'll get to all that because I am a big follower of yours on social media, your social media stuff. But what was your family life like with regard to Judaism? Were you from an observant family at all?
We're Reform Jews. We went to temple on the High Holy Days. We were at synagogue for other reasons, more cultural reasons. I became a bat mitzvah. I was confirmed. But most of our Jewish life, more cultural than faith-based, but we were always a big Zionist family, even though we didn't it wasn't a banner that we wore all the time. But my late grandfather, Milton Shapiro, he died in 2003, was a big American Zionist leader. When the New York Times used to use that word in a positive way, his obituary said American Zionist leader. So we always grew up really knowing who we were, where we came from. And so it's kind of crazy because I really would have never expected that at this stage in my life, that's those are the titles I would have to lead with these days. But I kind of feel like, I don't know, I was made for this moment.
I love your description on Twitter, the Zionist Barbie, by the way. I love that.
Well, that's the nicer one. I get a couple of other really hideous Barbie references, but
I'm going to discuss that as well. Zionist is just, a nicer way of saying Jew for them. So,
totally.
Did you ever experience anti-Semitism as a kid at all?
I was really lucky. And I think that maybe it was naivete, or maybe it was that there was a time when public anti-Semitism was frowned upon. So it's kind of shocking these days. I do remember, I remember someone throwing pennies at me as a kid and telling me that wondering whether or not I was going to pick them up. I do remember people calling me a Jap, which to this day still, I find the term to be so hideous. I can't really I'll never be able to reclaim it. But that was kind of the extent of it. It wasn't, if someone said something nasty about Jews, they were getting in trouble. They weren't being amplified by, tens of thousands of people and getting a pat on the back. So it was different. And maybe part of that was that I grew up in a town where there were a lot of Jews and it wasn't really a big deal. But that being said, I live in New York City and there are a lot of Jews and it is a big deal.
Yeah. So, I remember the term Jap always used to bother me too, even when other Jews said it. It's like, if you say it, you're giving license to someone else to use it derogatorily.
Yeah, very, very much so. I'll never really get past it because it always had this biting, undertone to it. It was never really used in a nice way, even if we try. There are a lot of words that I especially as someone in the sexuality field, the word slut, which also makes me break out into hives. I hate that word. And I get that some people want to reclaim it and take ownership of it. It's never going to be me. Like, it's not my thing. I kind of feel like once you're old enough to figure out that you can reclaim it, the damage has already been done. And I feel the same way about the term Jap. It's never really going to be something that sits well with me, but you know.
Oh, speaking of what you do, so I want to fast forward. I'm going to come back to Jewish things definitely. Okay, but what made you decide to go into your field? I mean, just a big Dr. Ruth fan?
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, when I started in this field, I probably barely knew who Dr. Ruth was.
Mm-hmm.
So, growing up on Long Island and really being a high schooler in the early 1990s, I'm very, very comfortable with my Gen X status. We grew up in a time when HIV and AIDS was being talked about everywhere, but it was finally being talked about in a way that acknowledged that it didn't discriminate because of one's sexual orientation, right? It was a virus. And so all of a sudden I grew up with parents who became super involved in HIV and AIDS awareness and fundraising and education. It just randomly something they were really passionate about. My mom and her best friend co-created our town's first AIDS awareness education program, peer leadership program. And so when I was 15, I came home after school one day and there were condoms and bananas on our dinner table. And my parents basically said, this is how you use a condom. And next week you go to peer training to teach others. And I kind of looked at them and said, okay, sure. And what I found though was that I was really comfortable talking about provocative issues. Now, by the way, I probably was comfortable because I wasn't sexually active at the time, so it was easier than having to talk about myself. But I do think that my parents kind of knew that they had raised me to be assertive, to take risks. Whether that was in a classroom or outside of the classroom. Do I think that they would have ever imagined that would have been my career? Definitely not.
What was that like, though? I mean, just you're going for training, and then you're kind of like being the guide for your classmates. Is that wonderful?
Well, I think in high school anyway, it was still really, sexual health prevention focused, right? And it was a different time in sex ed.
Yeah.
Now we focus on pleasure and agency and bodily autonomy. But back then it was, people weren't even talking about what it meant to be gay or lesbian, let alone, all of the different terms that we use, expansive terms that we use today. So it was definitely different. But I think what happened was I went to college. I went to the University of Pennsylvania, which yay these days.
I was going to ask about that as well. We'll get to there for sure. Yes.
So happy about that. What I found was I thought I was gonna go to law school. But what I had found was that there were a lot of really bright and sophisticated women, and I would throw myself into that group, that were making really terrible decisions when it came to their sex life. And it wasn't not using condoms. It was no agency. It was not getting the relationship, or not, deliberately not the relationship, that you wanted. And I was looking around at who was modeling for us these conversations. And Ruth was definitely up there and was definitely a pioneer in the field, but I wasn't entirely sure that at that stage in her life that was who was going to speak to my peers. And so I found myself doing the same work that I was doing in high school, in college, just with a little bit, being slightly more provocative, because it wasn't just sexual health. I was writing the anonymous sex advice column long before, every school had one. I was talking about female masturbation in the women's papers. And so my parents basically are like, I guess you're not going to law school.
So is there still like health, as far as is there still health classes in high school? Because I taught for a while. I never saw that in teaching, but I remember taking it in my high school. And we had the same thing, condoms on bananas, right. And they handed around rubber testicles, which people, of course, threw across the room at each other.
Right, of course. So it's funny. I actually spend my days still in classrooms doing the work that you're talking about. So this morning, for example, I had 8th graders
Wow.
Tomorrow I'll have fifth graders. I'll have someone else on, the day after that. So there are people that are doing it, but politically speaking, there is no universal mandate for
Mhm.
sexuality education, let alone like good sexuality education. So it's abundantly clear that not everyone gets the same information or information at all, which is still unfortunate.
Yeah, but you do go out, like you just said, you go out speaking to a lot of different schools and teens about sexuality, and so is there a proper age like to begin these conversations? Because you also go to like youngest like grammar schools as well.
Yeah. Birth is when you should start talking.
Okay, really?
No, I mean, seriously.
Yeah.
And every time I say that, someone, says seriously. But the answer is yes, right? I mean, even if we're raising kids of our own, like if a kid has a question, they deserve an answer, a very simple answer. But
Yeah.
we've created this environment where I think we've made people so afraid because we throw around this term age appropriateness as if there's this one magical time in which it's acceptable to hear things. Age appropriateness is kind of a bullshit phrase, right? It's used to gatekeep information. It actually has never, I professionally do not think it's ever helped us. The concept of age appropriateness doesn't apply to content, it applies to delivery, right? How much information you're giving, what's the purpose of you giving it, right? Like the language you use to give it. But if someone has a question, they should get a simple answer.
Okay.
So that's always been my philosophy, and my own children are obviously guinea pigs at this point, but they seem to be doing okay.
I've seen interviews with you when you had your kids. So what's the reception like when you go to speak to students? I mean, do teens show an eagerness to learn or discuss this, or is it like a nervous laughter or jokes or all of the above?
It's always a little bit of everything, but I try to set up a classroom and let people know that I'm not there to tell them what to do and what not to do, right? I'm there to help them make decisions, to help them make sense of the world they're living in, to give them facts.
Mhm.
I'm very upfront right from the beginning that I think that sex and sexuality are really incredible and important parts of our lives from birth to death. And that I'm never going to sit there and make anyone feel badly for the things they're thinking about or curious about or not curious about for that matter. But at this point, most of the schools that I work in, I've known some of these teens and kids for a really long time. So they're kind of used to me at this point. At this point.
You speak to teens and their parents too together, right? So who's more uptight? The parents are much more uptight than the kids usually.
Sometimes, well, the kids are incredibly savvy, I think, because for those of us Gen X and older, right? The world looks very different. I mean, take technology out of it for a second and communicating via social media and the way in which we express ourselves. But the language has changed, reproductive technology has changed, gender and expression. There are all these things that have changed in some way. And so oftentimes it's not that parents are nervous to talk about these things. They know they have a responsibility to do so. I think it's that they're often afraid that their information isn't up to date and that they're going to be thrown a question that's going to stump them in some way. And my take on that is big deal. So if you don't know an answer, be honest, say, the world looked different. I don't know the answer to that, but I'll get it for you.
Oh, so
right? Humility is a good thing.
Well, that's good. What advice would you give to parents that want to have these conversations?
So I would say we just have to jump right in and do it. And and as I ramble for a second, I think we put too much pressure on ourselves that we have to have this like one giant conversation. It's never been like that. Every time you talk about different kind of families, your values, when you talk about like how people want to get dressed in the morning, like all of those things where we talk about expression are talking about sexuality in some way, even if it's not explicitly about sex. Mm-hmm. What I like to tell parents when they say to me, my kids say they know everything, they don't want to hear, they're, like they're done. My comment is always, or my strategy is to say, look, I understand you know a lot. I got it. Like, you know a lot, but these conversations are for me. Because when I decided to help raise a young person, I made a commitment to sending young people out into the world with all the tools necessary to make good decisions. And so I need for me to make sure that I've given you all of those tools. So you can sit, you can listen, we can have a conversation, but it's as much for me as it is for you. And it's really hard for someone to respond negatively because then you're putting the responsibility on you as the adult. Like, this is our job. You know, in a classroom for me, I'm merely supplementing what people who are like at home living together are supposed to be doing all the time. I get them for like 40 minutes once a week. It's nothing in comparison.
But when you speak to students in schools, is there like one thing that they all seem to be like brought up more than anything else that they ask you?
I think that no matter what group you work with, no matter what age group, everyone really just wants to know if they're normal.
No.
Right? If the questions they have are normal, if their body is normal, if the things that they are concerned about are normal. And the reality is that, yes, it is. We live in this weird world where sex is either portrayed as totally exploitative and gratuitous or scary and fear-based and pathological. And that's not really the extremes where most people live, but that's the way we frame it. So it's important to remind people that their concerns are really common and as normal. I hate the word normal, but as normal as they can be. But that's really the big one. And then, of course, there's always like the question that is like some convoluted crazy thing that came from TikTok or something where someone heard that you could get pregnant if you did this thing while drinking something else upside down, like, something insane. And then you have to say, no, please don't get your information on TikTok.
Right. Yeah. Well, that could go for a lot of different subjects.
For sure.
Well, like you said at the beginning, so you've been on many shows, Good Morning America, Oprah, etc. So when did that first start happening that you were recognized as a go-to in your field?
Part of it was kind of dumb luck, to be honest. When I started in this field and started doing things publicly, there weren't that many people doing that, and not as a young person. So I think the first TV show I did was in 2001. It was the Montel Williams show.
Wow.
Many years ago. I mean, this is still like early internet, right? The field was not saturated. So I had a lot of nice opportunities. And I was and still am pretty fearless. So I think it was like a nice it was a good pairing to be doing media. But the other thing is that once you start to do a little bit and you can be a trusted resource, then people start to call you. So right after Montel, I think it was MSNBC and then Good Morning America. And then obviously once you do Oprah, things kind of.
How was that for you? Like, that the feeling of, wow, I'm on TV, or just like Oprah wants to speak to me. How does that register to you?
So I mean, I have to say, I still do love TV, and I will be completely candid by saying that my media life has taken a giant dive since speaking very publicly about Israel.
Sure. No.
I mean, the only TV show I've been on recently twice is I-24. So, which, by the way, I'm proud and thrilled to be on, and I would not have changed a single thing that I've done. Like, speaking out comes with a price, and that was a price I was willing to pay. So it's fine. I don't say it. I mean, it is a negative, but I'm not like jaded by it. It is what it is. Mm-hmm. But at the time, Oprah was big, but it was still like 2003 maybe. So it was still early. And I think that I was maybe just clueless enough not to realize how very big it was, because I flew out there myself. Like, I had no one with me. I didn't have a publicist with me. I didn't have my mom with me. Like, I just showed up. I was 26 years old. And I have to be honest, her audience hated me. They hated
Why?
me. I think I was just very young and like very New Yorky liberal. Read that as what you want. And people really had a hard time with what I was saying. And I remember like they had message boards back then. There was no, it was so early in like the world of the internet. Social media didn't exist. And I remember reading people say like, she should come back on when she's married. And I just thought, I am married. Like I've been married for years. You guys didn't even bother to pay attention because you made an assumption that in order for someone to say certain things, obviously they had to like, be out on the town the whole time. So they didn't really love me, but
You want a preconceived notion of what it should be.
that's okay. It's fine. It was a really good experience, I think. And the funny thing is the experiences that often I've always loved the most are, or I should say prior to the real polarization in the media, was that there was a time there was nothing more fun than going on like live Fox News and doing some live debates. I mean, and being the lone liberal was great because, you had the spotlight on you. You could throw some zingers out there and just like help people think a little bit differently. But I loved it. Obviously now it's the extremes on all sides.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. Yeah,
it's much harder to have a nuanced conversation these days than.
Well, I think we're relatively the same age range, and I also remember the time that we could discuss anything with friends and not be like, I hate you now.
Right.
It's such a different thing.
It's very depressing, actually, because I grew up as a debater. Like, I was a model Congress geek. I love the art of debate. I love being able to take someone else's perspective and debate a side that I don't necessarily personally agree with. I think those are skills and tools that are so critically important to being like a fully formed human being. And now you can't even have any discourse at all. Everyone is so siloed. It's, for a world that acknowledges so much, so many things exist outside of binaries for whatever reason. When it comes to anything political, your goodness in the world is measured by which side you stand on. And I find that's going to be really detrimental if it's not already.
I agree. Well, let's talk about your book, the Dr. Mom's Guide to Sexuality, Social Media, and Other Adolescent Realities. And it's an interesting title because to me, it's a quandary in the fact that it can probably be both easier and more difficult than ever to talk to your kid about these topics now. So easy because there are more resources available to help, teach. But at the same time, it stresses the importance about teaching your kids because of the fact that social media is so readily accessible. And like you said, on TikTok, and kids might come across things either that they're not ready for, or you're not ready for them to see, or false information. So tell me your thoughts on the book itself about it.
Yeah. So I wrote this, I co-wrote the book with a friend of mine, Dr. Jennifer Wider. So she's an MD, I'm a PhD. So we each had our own take on things. The thing I love most, I think, about my field is I am definitely someone who believes that parent caregiver conversation with young people is so critically important. And it really does change how people see the world, right? Like when trust and love unconditionally, who's willing to just answer your questions for you. And so if anything, one of the things that Jenna and I have always tried to do in this book and just in our work in general is to make people feel comfortable just having these conversations and knowing that, yeah, big deal. So you get it wrong sometimes. Like, take ownership of it and move on. That's okay. You're not expected to know everything. And for a lot of us, if we didn't have models of these conversations growing up, then it's not a surprise that it doesn't come naturally to us. That's okay. So hopefully anything that I do is meant to make people feel confident about doing it and a little bit empowered and also to recognize that, like, if we fuck up, big deal. Just admit it and say, I made a mistake. I gave you the wrong information. I'm really sorry I did that, but I want you to have the right information. Right. And that, by the way, from a young person's perspective, goes a long way. To know that you have adults in your life that are willing to admit that they're wrong. Like, it's a game changer.
Well, my kids always like to point out when I'm wrong.
Right. But when we do it ourselves, they're like, whoa. Oh, I didn't see that coming at all.
All right. So how did you get involved with the show Married at First Sight?
So I was doing a lot. I was doing a lot of TV as like a talking head, and there were always times where people would send me ideas of shows, and some of them were really just like insane. I got called to do a show which never was made, but someone asked me if I wouldn't mind watching people have sex and then judging them, and I said, under no circumstance am I doing that. And not because I was saying that in like a shameful sort of way, but like, no, what is the redeeming value in that? Why would I ever judge how someone else
They want you to
experiences?
hold up cards with numbers, like,
Like, it was so bizarre. And I'm really, again, my philosophy is not to shame
right, right.
people. Like, consenting adults get to do what they want to do. Like,
Sure.
that's what grown-ups, mature people do. So, I was working with a manager at the time, and I got this phone call about this show. And the call that I got was, okay, don't freak out, but they're interested in having you as an expert on a show where four social scientists arrange marriages and people meet at the altar. And I'll tell you exactly what I said. I said, under no circumstance am I doing this. Under no circumstance. And she said to me, just do me a favor. It's already been made in Denmark. It's online. Could you just watch? Just I think you're going to be surprised. Just watch it. And I said, like begrudgingly, okay, fine, I'll watch it. And so I spent like 6 straight hours watching the show with subtitles. And I couldn't stop watching. I was transfixed. I thought that it was smart and thoughtful, and it held up a lens or held up a mirror to us as viewers that allowed you to think about who you were in a partnership and the good things you did and the perhaps not so good things. And I really believe in transformational TV. And I thought, okay, if I could play a role in not just like reality TV, but giving people an opportunity to watch something and get something out of it themselves as human beings, then maybe this could be interesting. And I commonly, when I'm making a decision, I often think, what is the worst thing someone could say about me? Like, what's the worst thing? And I literally listed all the horrible things someone could say if I did the show. And apparently I was okay with it. I realized it was fine. So I did 3 seasons there, and then left. But I would say, there is magic a first season when like the cat's not out of the bag yet, and you're getting people who, are really in it because they want to find love, and they don't know what the shtick is, that they're actually getting married to a stranger. After a first season, it's a lot harder, right? Because if you see the 4 experts that are on TV and they're talking to you, you kind of know what the show is, right? And so you know what you're signing up for. And I will tell you that obviously people who sign up to marry a stranger on television are not representative of the general public.
I would agree.
They're just not. So again, like, everyone has to shift their expectations a bit.
All right, so let's get back. We're gonna go back to Jewish things now. So
That.
you're pretty Jewish minded. I see by your posts and everything. You mentioned your grandfather. Who's president of the Jewish National Fund. So I wanted to. How did you first find out about October 7th, and how did it impact you that day?
So, well, I may I go back just
Of
for
course.
context? Okay,
Yes.
thanks. So I never hid the fact that I was a proud Jew and Zionist from anyone. Like even in my, at a time I was on a TV show like that, it was never a secret, right? And I didn't realize like I had to lead with it all the time, but it was never something I was ashamed of. But something wound up happening in my field, a field that is supposed to be about
I was going to ask you about that as well. Yeah.
and reproductive justice and bodily autonomy and consent and indigeneity and like all those good things that we fight for. And in May of 2021, which was the last big Hamas-Israel flare-up, I was sitting on my couch and I was like scrolling through social media, and I was watching all of these people in my field. Yeah. People I had mentored, people I had taught, people who I had like stood side by side with, fighting and amplifying their voices and their issues. I watched people flip a paradigm and call Israel Goliath and Hamas David. And I have to tell you, Jonathan, in that very moment, I literally think I broke. Like, just everything in me shattered. I had known there was stuff on college campuses because I do a lot of campus work for years. But it was at that moment where I saw the betrayal of the field that I had devoted my life to. And the hypocrisy, the hypocrisy and the just unapologetic conspiracy theory anti-Semitism, right? And so I cried for about 24 hours. And then in that very moment, as soon as I was done, I said, never again am I not going to put myself and my people as Jews, as as Zionists, as this connection to Israel. I'm never going to not lead with that. I want to remind people of who I am and what I stand for. And so my platform had been changing for a while. But again, like, did I ever anticipate October 7th? No. I mean, am I surprised by what has transpired since? No, which is horrifying. But I think what happened was we were on vacation, and because I've spent a decent amount of time in Israel, I have the red alert apps on my phone. And so I was actually in Greece, and at 6 o'clock in the morning, I woke up to my phone, my husband too, buzz, 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 buzz. And we just grabbed our phones and saw and realized like this was not like anything else. Fine. And we scrolled, we called friends, we couldn't get in touch with people. People didn't know what was going on. And it was absolutely terrifying. And I mean, we were with some friends on vacation. I was hysterical. Because it took mere seconds, right, for all of the bigots to come out. Like there was literally no grace period whatsoever for any understanding. And it was look, it was incredibly hard. It's been incredibly hard, but like take that with a grain of salt because I wasn't in Israel. Right. Yeah. So I recognize that even having to deal with the bullshit here is still a luxury compared to what Israelis were experiencing. So I don't want to make myself seem like a martyr in this. I was dealing with it, but I wasn't on the front lines there.
Yeah. It hit me the same way. I mean, I said it without hyperbole. And I mean, I'll never be the same again after that day. It's just this affected in a way that's just really deep inside.
Yeah, I think that unfortunately, I've had my fair share of fights in school settings and other things in this space. So I have felt like for years I've been screaming into the void, begging people to pay attention. And to be honest, I was basically like people used to like metaphorically like pat me on the head like I was Chicken Little, like, you're so cute. You're like, okay, like it's only to find out, right, that the worst had happened and I was actually not wrong. And I have to tell you, I've never wanted to be wrong more in my entire life. Like I wish I was wrong. And so I think that I don't think any Jew around the globe is ever going to be the same after October 7th. I think it is a fundamental moment. It was a wake-up call for this generation and the post-World War II generation to say, who are we and what do we stand for? And I don't think any of us will ever be the same again. Walking out my door, pulling off disgusting stickers everywhere I go, right? Like I like looking at the people who see my, my map of Israel or my Magen David that I will not take off. Like I'm not backing down to, anyone. Stupid as that might sound. I'll never be the same. Ever. I don't think any of us will be. And so maybe it was a wake-up call that we needed. I think that, sorry, I shouldn't say that. We didn't need October 7th, right. But I do think that the global Jewish community, it was time to remember that we need Israel. Yeah. And I think that for a long time, we were under the assumption that Israel needed us a lot more than we needed her.
Yeah, no, I agree. And, like you, the same thing. I'm not a fighter. I've been in many fights, mostly because I'm Jewish throughout my life. And one of the things is that I always was happy that my kids grew up relatively sheltered as far as that aspect, and that's gone.
Yeah.
That's gone now.
Yeah.
Have you been to Israel often, or?
Yeah. So I will be back in the next 2 weeks for the anniversary of the 7th, but I have been, this will be my 8th trip since December.
Wow, wow.
It has been, to be honest, I felt, so in November of 2022,
Mhm.
I was speaking in Boston at Jewish National Fund's conference on a panel called Champions of Zionism. And so my family co-founded and I chair a program called Caravan for Democracy. And for the last 14 years, we send non-Jewish student leaders on college campuses to Israel every year. It has been a privilege and a labor of love. And there is like nothing more important now than having non-Jewish allies on your campus.
I think that's a
And the
great
best,
thing.
right? And the best way to do that is to get them to Israel to see like the bullshit apartheid, like it's laughable, right? But unless you're there and you see it, you need the firsthand experience. And so I realized when I was giving that weekend that I was supposed to be speaking, it was my grandfather's 19th yard site, and my grandfather was like my person.
Mhm.
And I literally realized it had been 7 years since I had been to Israel, since my
Oh,
kids were little. Despite the fact that I was sending students every year, and I felt so totally untethered. Like I sobbed hysterically, like sitting in the audience, like watching people speak, I sobbed. And I realized that and I don't know if it was what I was sensing in the world, if it was my age, maybe it was like menopause. I really don't know, but I was feeling very, very untethered. And so I came back home and I said to my husband, I need to go to Israel. And he's like, great, we'll plan a trip for next year. And I said, yeah, well, I was kind of thinking like sooner. He said, well, when were you thinking? I said, I was thinking I would go in 3 weeks. He's like, I can't pull it together for our son is applying to college. I said, yeah, I know. No one has to go with me. Like, I just need to go. And so that was, that was almost 2 years ago. And since then, I think I've been some 12, 13 times since then
wow.
or something like that. Yeah. But the truth is I needed it.
I get it. I totally get it.
I needed to feel my feet on the ground. And I think that's what I needed also after October 7th. Like you felt so helpless being here. I was screaming into the void, yelling at idiots online. That didn't feel like enough. I just needed to I need to do something. So yeah, I've been a lot and volunteering, and it's been a sheer privilege to just bear witness.
No, that's great it's been 5 years since I've been. My daughter's there now, but I
Ah,
feel the same way that I should go back at some point there too. So, well, no, you mentioned your school. So no sooner had the atrocities happened than the pro-Hamas rally started in all these colleges and campuses around the world.
yeah.
You went to Penn, you went to NYU. So what are your
Batting a
thoughts?
thousand. I
Yeah.
am batting 1,000. Yeah.
Yeah, when you see these Jew-hating, marches at your former schools, what was going through your mind then?
I mean, so horrified. So horrified for the main reason that when I was at Penn and I did a bachelor's and master's at Penn, there was no better place to be a Jewish student. First of all, there were so many Jews there. I mean, I was likely to get yelled at on Locust Walk, the main walk, for handing out condoms than I would have ever been because of Israel or because I was Jewish, right? Like there was the preacher who stood next to me and yelled at me and, spewed fire and brimstone at me, but you got used to that. But it was never about who I was, right? As a Jewish person. And so seeing the campus that I spent so much of my life at, feeling safe, right?
Yeah.
Feeling assimilated, having no issues of anti-Semitism whatsoever, that everyone sort of knew each other and accepted each other. And maybe that was my own little bubble, but it feels like a giant betrayal. It's actually hard to imagine that the place that you called home for all of those years would be overrun by people chanting for Intifada and death to the Jews. it's also something that makes me thankful that I am not a student there now, because if I was, I can't tell you what I would do. Like
Right.
I don't know. I really don't know. I feel that way also about my kids, right? Like my son's campus is relatively good. There are a couple of things, but if my kids who know how to be fighters in their own way are in the middle of the lion's den, I don't know what they would do with their friends. Like that's a scary position, not because I think that they're in danger, but to feel like you are, I mean, I guess it's the way I shouldn't say that. I guess it's the way I feel every day. Like I feel like I put on armor every day to leave my
Yeah.
apartment. So, but I was hoping, like you, that our kids would be able to escape some of that feeling, and they can't.
Well,
They can't.
you mentioned your son. Even before I started following you on social media, I remember I reading about you in the paper about your son's school, that there were things
Yeah.
that happened there. So can you tell a little about that? What happened there?
Yes. So my son graduated in May of 2023 from a hyper progressive school called Fieldston. It is a New York City independent school, or just outside of, in the Bronx. And it is a place that was founded by Jews. It was, it is, when you think of a school with progressive issues, like it's basically, if a school's going to be in the paper, this is the school. And again, for many years, we believed that the school shared our values.
Right.
And so what started to happen in high school, and my son got there in seventh grade, but by high school, the administration had started to change, and there were some really horrific things that started to take place. So we had a speaker compare Jews to Nazis.
Yeah.
We had a anti-Zionist Jewish teacher give the middle finger to two rabbis who came in to speak.
Wow.
We had this is, and by the way, this is all during COVID, right? Like, so they're also virtual, they're like disconnected. There's so much to unpack with all of this. And then of course, in an effort, just brace yourself, because I remember this day like it was yesterday. My son was in 10th grade. And in an effort to sort of fix some of like the speaker problems, the school decided to host an organization to do on Zoom a 40-minute talk on the Israel-Palestinian conflict. Now, first question is, what really can you do in 40 minutes when it's a conflict that's been around for thousands of years? I don't know. Like, you have to start at the beginning, really. You can't just start in 48. And by the way, they didn't. They started like 20 years ago. So imagine imagine that. But the punchline is the speakers were from J Street.
I remember. That's right. Yes.
The speakers were from J Street. And so I was trying really hard not to like make, it's enough that I make my kids crazy about a lot of things, like lovingly crazy, but I was kind of hoping that like maybe, just maybe, J Street would maybe operate from like a basic decency, like factual history, but I was kind of prepared. And so I said to Mav, look, let's print out some fact sheets and some timelines. Like, it's important that going in, so that if something comes up, you know you can choose how to respond. But like, I want to make sure you have the facts. So we had this conversation before. And so he was sitting in his room. It was on Zoom. I was sitting in my room, and I hear him yell, "Mom, you need to come in here." And so I run in, and he looks at me and he says, "They've been talking for 35 minutes. They've only said horrible things about Israel, and they have never mentioned the words Hamas or the Palestinian Authority." Can you imagine that? Again, and this is before October 7th, but like, Hamas was still an entity. The Palestinian Authority is still a problem. So I said, "What do you want to do?" He said, "Well, I'm going to put a note in the chat." And so there were hundreds of people on the Zoom, faculty, students. And so he puts in the chat, with all due respect, there seems to be a double standard. Where's the conversation about Hamas and the PA? The speaker looks at the box and says, and I'm there for this, like, so I can hear it. "Oh, look, everyone, there is a question from Maverick. Oh, I'm so sorry. We are out of time." Okay, we're out of time.
Yeah.
And then a girl writes to him publicly, a girl who he thought was his friend, and writes, it's not something like, it's not their fault that Israel is a settler colonial state, and like starts to like unload. And then the screen goes dark. The screen goes dark. And he's just looking at me like, what happened? And I thought, okay, where this is it, right? Like this is the moment where like this begins. And so it got much messier the next day when he was called an ethnic cleanser and a genocidal maniac. And the kid who had called him that, who was also the kid from the Zoom, has a Instagram page that's devoted to freedom fighters, all of the terrorists who are in jail for suicide bombings. Now, imagine, by the way, if my kid had ever put up like an ode to some racist, like what would have happened? So anyway, it got very ugly, very, very ugly. And so it was brutal. It was totally brutal. But I will say, as horrible as it was, it really did prepare him for what the world was going to throw at us shortly after. Right. So he had the experience. He knew what those first pangs of betrayal felt like. So he didn't have to have it later on. And I mean, it's hard. Listen, there were tears. It was awful. I'm not telling you it's not awful. It's still awful. But he knew. He knew, and he uses that now as fuel because he never wants to feel that way again and doesn't want anyone else to feel that way.
I'm sorry that he went through that. And for those who don't know, J Street is the shield that all the Jew haters hide behind, right now. The fake Jewish organization. So you're in New York now. I'm from New York. My oldest lives there now also. So there are times that when I see things happening that New York looks unrecognizable to me. So how do you feel it is for Jews in New York, or right now, I guess?
It's such a good question. I think that when like the average person comes here who's never been here or doesn't come here, a lot, they feel like everything is kind of like status quo. For me, it does not feel at all status quo. I feel like, I mean, we said it earlier. I know that the minute I wake up, I put armor on. I don't know who I'm going to have a fight with, but I know something is going to happen during the day. It's just a matter of what. It could be that I carry around a Sharpie and stickers with me and like pens to scrape off the disgusting blood libel that's all over my neighborhood and all the neighborhoods I go to. I've seen the kidnapped posters taken down everywhere. I see the morons walking around in their keffiyehs. I've been on the other side of an encampment and had words. I've been my girlfriend and I were outside of jail support after the Columbia finally decided to, have people arrested, only to be told, and I quote, like, there was my girlfriend and I standing there, just the two of us, by the way, just with our flag and our bring them home t-shirts. And I kid you not, someone walked right up to us and said, "Get the fuck out of here, Zionist, you're not welcome here." And I looked at them and I said, well, this is a public New York City street corner, and we're here peacefully, so I'm not going, not moving. Yeah. Sorry, but that's it feels like that's happening everywhere. And again, like maybe some of it is that I'm looking for it. I know exactly what I need to spot, right? And I'm constantly scanning, but it feels different. It does. It feels different.
Yeah, no, that's what I see, and that's what my daughter tells me as well. So yeah, I mentioned earlier, like you're listed as one of the top pro-Israel influencers on social media. I follow you religiously. I think I even wrote to you once thanking you for using your platform to speak. So whenever I post anything Jewish-minded, I'm trolled. Every single time I post an episode of this podcast, and it doesn't have to have anything to do with Israel. It just says Jewish, and I'm attacked. If I mention Israel, forget it. It gets disgusting. So was there any trepidation at all about speaking up on social media? Because as ugly as I find it for me, the accounts I see by Jewish women are obscene.
Oh,
like yes. And I've seen the same thing. Some of the things that you posted, it's just disgusting. So was there any hesitation or worry at all?
I don't know what this says about me, but no. No. And there's a reason. I guess there's a reason for it. I perhaps part of being in a field from a very young age where people hated me or sent me nasty things is that I learned to develop a thick skin. Right? Being a young person talking about sex publicly, Sean Hannity once told his audience that, or suggested to his audience, that I take underage girls to get abortions without parental consent. This was years and years ago now. By the way, I don't do that in case you're wondering, but still, when he tells an audience that, they like, you can imagine what's coming at you, right? So I'm used to people saying, they've called me a whore and all versions of that a million times over, whatever, you kind of get used to it. I will say, I have never seen the levels of hate ever the way I have since speaking up for Israel and for Jews. Like ever. It's so much worse. It is unbelievable. Like I've been told, it's a shame Hamas missed me. Maybe I should go to a music festival. They're keeping the ovens warm for me. Like all of it. And so
I think you post, those are even some of the milder ones, some of the things.
they're right.
Yeah.
So no, I'm not, but I think part of that is because I was raised to be fearless. I feel like if I am not going to speak up and fight, then what am I doing? I've devoted my life to fighting for everyone else. It's our time. Look, tikkun olam, the concept of repairing the world, wasn't repair the world and sacrifice yourself in the meantime. And I think that's what a lot of us did for a long time. We forgot that we were important to the story. We were so busy fixing trying to fix everything else. But, I do think that I started, so years ago, after that May of 2021 Hamas problem, when I started to change my platform, it's when I started to really get like ugly things coming at me. And so I used to tell my friends and my peers, and they literally were like, again, okay, it's not that bad. It's not that bad. And so I started responding on TikTok, because I don't know how I wound up in the like Jew hater algorithm, but that is literally like firmly where I am. And they send horrible things. However, they are very good for content, I have to say. And I feel like if I can control the narrative in my own way, then I'm going to do it. And so what I started to do was take some of these really ugly comments, and I would respond in this like really snarky, sassy way with facts. And I would smile at the end. And I will tell you, Jew haters hate when Jewish women smile. They hate it so much. It is so triggering to them. It is so great. So I started to make these videos, and to be honest, my husband and some of my family were like, why are you doing this? You're amplifying these idiots. You don't know if they're bots. What are you doing? And I said, I'm doing it because I want to show my peers that this is what exists, that this is what I'm getting. And if they think their kids aren't exposed to it, they're wrong. And I wanted to show them how to do it in a way that was playful and authentic to them. And so, and that you felt like you were taking some control back over what people were saying. And so, my family sort of rolled their eyes at me for a while. And then, to be honest, after October 7th, everyone looked at me and said, I get it. I understand why you're doing it. Right. And part of it was feeling like I am not going to let this person get away with saying this. And I don't really care who the person is. I want other Jews to know that there is someone who has their back, So, yeah, I don't know. Maybe it was stupid of me to enter the arena and sort of like not care about what was going to come back at me. But
no,
again, if I'm not going to do, if I don't do it for us, what am I going to do? I'm not going to cower. And by the way, I love smiling, but they hate it. They hate it so much.
No, I agree with you. To me, it's always like, if you're not speaking up now, what are you waiting for? I mean, really, it's this is the time right now. And
I will say, John, sorry, I apologize for interrupting. One of the things that I was thinking, and I think about my kids a lot, like what, sure. Like, do they, how does it feel, to see that people are saying horrible things about the person you love. But I think what it's helped to do in a way is instead of making them fearful of social media, they see how ridiculous and hateful and ignorant these people are. So they've kind of developed a thick skin, I think, just by being in proximity to all of it. Whereas I think for people who are sheltered from it all, it is so painful to receive that or see it. But for my kids, they're like, oh, these people are idiots. These are the same, different handle, different like egg, whatever the avatar is. But they get it. They're not bothered by it. And maybe part of that came from just, growing up with a mother who talked about sex for a living. So they were used to people, saying things about me.
Well, only a couple of things left. I just want one of the things you touched upon it a little bit. So, I've seen you post about this, really hits home for me. I posted about it myself and talked about it often. I grew up fairly liberal in many respects. So I would say from your post, you're even more than me. So I'm an author in the writing community. Besides being an author yourself, your field is all about inclusion and acceptance. So here's where the disconnect now comes in. And I've seen you discuss this as well. Like I said, I see it all the time in the writing community right now. We're about inclusion for you, and you. But when it comes to Jews, not you. So you just discuss that a little bit, because it's always, we want to include everyone except for you guys.
Yeah. I will say there has been nothing more painful than seeing the people who you thought shared your values stab you in the back. Well, not stab you in the front, stab you in the back, stab you in the side. Like they have no issue with any of it. And you start to realize that the people who believe all women people don't actually believe all women, right? Particularly if they're Jewish or Israeli, despite like evidence and testimony, even from the, the monsters themselves, like, no, that's not real, and then I think that for most people, they first think like, oh, they just don't understand. And I have long since passed that. Like, they absolutely understand. It is a very deliberate decision to turn off part of your brain and say, you know what, all of these things I stand for, this group is different. It's almost as if they've been given license to buy into all of the old like protocols, conspiracy theory bullshit that they've heard their whole lives. And this was just a reason like, oh, I knew it. I gotcha. Right. And so it is incredibly, incredibly painful. The sexuality community is horrific. I wrote a piece in January on Medium calling out the sexuality. By the way, calling out, I don't care. Like, I don't care about that language. I think you are horrible. And so I'm not looking to have like an ongoing dialogue with you. I want you to feel shame. I want you to feel shame. You are the people who say that we believe women and men for that matter, right? And they jump through hoops to call Jews white supremacists, to ignore history, to ignore indigeneity, all of it. So yeah, I mean, the artsy professions, the educational professions, the psych-driven professions are horrible. And I do think that we have a responsibility to make sure, I mean, there's a part of me that just wants them to suffer. And so I'm going to make it my mission to do that. And I have to, right? I have to do that, because if I don't, right? If I don't fight it, then I will feel nothing but guilt and shame that I contributed and supported those communities for years. And I want them to know that the betrayal I feel comes at a price, and I'm not gonna let anyone get away with this. Well, and so I think that there are a lot of people doing that now, but it's okay, because I would much rather at this point know who my enemy is. And maybe that sounds like super aggressive, but that's kind of how I feel. Like, I want to know who you are. Tell me exactly who you are.
They do.
They do. They have no, well, they think they don't, right? They're always like, there's a lot of like word salad around it, and then they zing you. But
well, that's the shame of it. Whenever I hear progressive in the title right now, I automatically think Jew hating right now, for the most part. Yeah,
totally. It's 100%. And that's I think that's such a problem, because there's so many liberal values that I hold dear.
Right.
And yet I find myself in this space where I really feel like I feel like politically, societally homeless in a lot of ways. Like, I want to be around people who call out and recognize with integrity that anti-Semitism is a problem on all sides of the political spectrum. right? That we're not going to put our heads in the sand. We're going to say it's a problem here, it's a problem here, and it's, by the way, it's all the same. Doesn't make a difference where it comes from. It's all the same, and it's never okay. And so it's been a really hard thing. I think that part of it is why my life and my career has shifted slightly, and why I'm doing so much more talking about the things that fulfill me, because I am so angry and disenfranchised with the people who claim to be progressive but show
what are
no
you
signs
working?
of that.
What are you working on next?
Well, I mean, I'm still teaching. I'm doing more speaking in terms of fearless parenting, like the difficult conversations, from sex ed to anti-Semitism, which is really funny because you would think those two are not connected, but actually the tools and tips and advice that I give to parents and caregivers on how to talk about these issues of sexuality are really no different than talking about anti-Semitism. Right. I did not think at this stage in my life that would happen, but not to be like the consummate optimist, but I will be briefly. Despite the fact that things feel so horrible, right? The fact that we are still here after thousands of years of odds being stacked against us. I mean, our existence is a miracle. So we were made for this moment. Like we were. I mean, by the way, it sucks that we were made for this moment because it means we have a history of persecution, but we were made for it. And maybe there's an opportunity to empower people by reminding them that as hard as things are, we are a small but super mighty tribe that were made for tough things. And we've survived and we're still here. So
I appreciate you and your account. You're one of the accounts that I feel like are must follows. Are there any accounts that you feel like people should follow?
Oh my goodness, there are so many, and it depends on which platform. I mean, I think that having a good mix, I really oh my goodness. Like I love some of the young activists, the Hillel Silvermans and Matthew Nuriels. Emily Schrader is wonderful. I feel like there are people I follow all day long, like the End Jew Hatred, I think, has amazing calls to action all of the time. Stop anti-Semitism. Obviously, anything surrounding, my goodness, I'm drawing a blank, but there's so many. I could come up with a list and send them to you of so many people and places that I love to follow. But I would say this also. One of the really interesting things in this complicated time around Judaism in Israel is that there was a time when I was just like, before my whole platform was around, this stuff now, that people who were right of center or remotely conservative absolutely hated everything I did and said, like hated it. And it's okay. Like, it's okay. Like, I get it. But interestingly enough, now, I mean, in addition to like pissing off people on the left and right, which I guess means I've done something right, I've also, oddly enough, developed these like nice relationships with people on both sides. And it's really interesting to hear people who would not have been my political peer write to me and say, hey, listen, I really don't agree with a lot of the things you say about like relationships or gender or whatever, but I really like the stuff that you say about Israel and the Jews. And my reaction to that is no problem. I totally get it. And I appreciate it. We do not always have to agree, and that's fine. And I think that maybe that's the silver lining also, is that it's right. I mean, people have come together who would not have ever come together. And so I'm appreciative of that I think that, unlikely allies do emerge.
No, I agree. That's 100% how I've been too. It's like, I embrace Judaism, I embrace Jewish accounts, and I can overlook a lot of other things because we're all in this fight together right now.
Yeah.
How can people follow you on social media?
Well, it depends on what kind of glutton for punishment you are.
No, that's true. Yes.
But I would say I am on, well, I still want to call it Twitter, but I guess it's not.
Still say Twitter, sorry. Yes.
On X, Twitter, and Instagram at Logan Levkoff. And if you really are a masochist and want to dive into TikTok, I'm at Dr. Logan Levkoff. And by the way, you'll get like a different personality on each, person on each one. Like Twitter is like extra angry. agree. Instagram is like a little bit like nicer, and TikTok is really just like a snarky mess, but entertaining.
I want to thank you again for coming on. Like I said, you are one of the accounts that I feel are must follows for me, and I do appreciate you using your platform and your voice to speak out on behalf of all these Jewish issues. So again, sincere thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Jonathan, for having me. I so appreciate it. And I think it's really important that we remember we are all in this together. We all do our part in some way. And we don't have the luxury of taking a pass on this. So
Agreed.
we do what we have to do.
Well, again, this has been The Jewish Lens. I'm Jonathan Rosen. Again, a very special thanks to Dr. Logan Levkoff. And please like, comment, and subscribe.
Thanks for tuning in to The Jewish Lens, where all items used was strictly kosher.